students, developing student courts, not going soft on student violence or any of the rest of it, but you got to be very careful how you do this because you can dramatically change that environment. But I've also worked with these officers where they provide a level of security in very difficult neighborhoods.
Yeah. So another question on the waiver. You said, George, you support the 8 and 9 district waiver, but for those districts. But there's a question now, particularly for recognized award-winning districts. They're still going to face problems come 2014 because California does not have a state waiver, and so if you can talk about the prospects. I know it's a frustrating subject for you about the reauthorization of Elementary and Secondary School Act, or No Child Left Behind. What are the prospects and what's the potential relief for districts in California?
Well, I think for the reauthorization of ESEA, known as right now, this iteration is No Child Left Behind, it's very difficult. In the last session of Congress, we tried to work together. We weren't able to work together on a committee. This is a law, the Elementary Secondary Education Act, has been bipartisan since 1964. Never, all my years have never been, and I passed it with the current speaker today, Republican John Boehner, and I worked together on this. I worked with George Bush on this. I worked with George Bush's father. I worked with Bill Clinton. I mean, Jimmy. This is a bipartisan effort by this nation, and all of a sudden now it's partisan. Sort of like someone mentioned Barbara Boxer. Highways have been bipartisan since 1945. Now all of a sudden they're partisan. What the hell is partisan about it? I don't get it. But anyway. And right now what they're saying is they're going to reintroduce in the committee the same bill that they reintroduced 2 years ago, which was a partisan bill, had no support on our side. But interesting thing happened. They introduced the bill and they got no support. I introduced the alternative on behalf of the Democratic caucus, and I got the teacher groups, I got the education groups, I got the civil rights organizations, but very interestingly, I got the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable. Kind of a first for George Miller. I got it up on my wall. But that's the kind of bill we built, going across the various interest groups and concern the employers community, the larger business community, the civil rights community that's worried about how poor children are doing in this school, the teacher organizations, and the school administrators and others. And they say, no, what we're going to do is we're going to do what we did 2 years ago. We're going to reintroduce that same bill, and we're going to do that in the committee. I mean, I know what's going on. They have many people in their caucus that believes that the federal government provides no added value to anything in this country. And so if you get rid of the federal role in education, it means nothing because it really doesn't add any value. That's how I've been told that numerous times. This will make no difference. So if you get rid of, $5 billion a year, it'll make no difference. Yes, it will. Oh, yes, it will. You all know this is your life. You know what you're doing. So we're continuing to work at it. We're trying to ignite a bipartisan bill in the Senate. We've been working over there, going over, spending more time in the Senate than in the House, trying to think how we can get this underway, then maybe that would force them to send a bill, and we could get a bill to the president's desk before we get into the next election cycle.
So just one out of No Child Left Behind, one lesson learned, one change that you would like to see, the primary change you'd like to see in the reauthorization bill, which would be different from No Child Left Behind.
It's a change that we couldn't make at the time, but today it just looks so horrible, and it's caused the education establishment, in the best sense of the word, our communities, to pay a very high price. And that was the idea, that you could make a decision about teachers, students, a school, administrators based upon one exam, one time a year. It's just impossible. No complex organization. Unfortunately, the press picked up whether or not...
I've been looking at Teresa.
The press picked that up into what became, as you know, every time the state scores are published, failing schools. And you just cannot overstate how hard that is on people who go to work and try to make the best of it every day, and then be told you're failing because of this one score, and it's in a test that you all know was never designed to provide that kind of accountability. It was never was never done for that purpose. But we couldn't change that, because when we did that, the idea of the federal government starting to come and tell what you could use tests for at the state level was just a complete non-starter. So we said, we'll take the tests as we find them, but we have to know how these kids are doing. The bright spot of No Child Left Behind is, for the first time, we shined a very bright light on poor performing schools and poor performing students and the gaps that existed. And of course the whole state's improved and the nation's improved, not as fast, as rapidly as we like, but that was very painful to see people characterized in the press and in conversations as failures, and in fact they weren't.
Eric, did you have anything at all to say?
No, I would echo that the number of schools that have been labeled failing, that word failing, which, whatever that means. I mean, I believe there's 38 categories, and if they were to pass 37 but not pass the 38th one, they'd be put into program improvement and then eventually could be labeled failing. And as George mentioned, he's right, that we wouldn't treat any organization like that. You wouldn't treat your own child like that. You wouldn't label them failing if they were 37 for 38. But the way that we have obsessed over one test and allowing that to dictate whether the school is labeled failing or not, I agree with Congressman Miller. I think that can be fixed. But the challenge is, and the give and take that we go through in the Congress is, if we pull that out, the threat is that no federal role in public education. And so you make tough deals and you make tough decisions when you're in Congress and you have to vote on something, because if the alternative is that the federal government has no role, and that means they're not a funding source at all, then I know I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to abolish the Department of Education. I'm not going to only let the states and the schools decide, and we don't have national standards, because as Congressman Miller mentioned, we have now been able to look at and identify different subgroups who weren't performing as well now, and we are able to lift up those subgroups, and that is what I see the role of the federal government is. We can't be on the ground in the classrooms teaching. That's the teacher's job. We can't be at the dinner table reinforcing the curriculum. That's the parent's job. But we can be at 30,000 feet saying, we understand that these students aren't learning as well because of different factors in their community, and we would like to have these guidelines and provide this funding. And I think that should be our role. But one test, one failure, that I hope is one change we make.
Just take 30 seconds. I think one of the hope fors, if you will, I was going to say the promise of Common Core and the Common Core assessments, is that we will be able to better delineate how students are doing. One of the great excitements about technology is that students will be able to demonstrate their competencies and their proficiencies and either move along or get reinforcement, and you'll be able to have a much greater differentiation within a classroom, within a school, and we won't be having everybody try to get over this one particular hurdle at this one particular time. We know from our own experience, our children all learn differently and at different times and in different ways. And we now have the opportunity to bring all of that to the classroom. And I think that's the excitement of Race to the Top. We're hoping that a number of these states will really lead the way in that direction, and there's a lot of indication that that's happening in the states that took advantage of it and are now on their way to starting to implement it. So it's pretty exciting, even as we think about the rewrite of the basic law.
Good, thanks. Eric.